Today, I would like to start by asking, how old were you when you first got social media? Now, how many of you still utilize social media nearly every day? For me personally, I first got social media in 2014 at the age of 13, and I've been using it ever since. That's been about 6 years, and I'm definitely not an exception. I became very fascinated by how screens and technology impact our brains about 2 years ago. I've read numerous books, I wrote multiple papers, and I decided to minor in psychology so I could better understand how the human mind works. Today, I would like to preview my main points. First, screens are vital to daily life as we know it. Second, this screen time stimulates chemicals in our brain. And third, these chemicals change our perception of the world. I would like to bring awareness to how social media alters the brain. To begin, I would like to talk about how we are part of Generation Z. We're the first generation to grow up exposed widely to technology. In an article by Docapel, someone who has studied this topic in depth, they state that we stare at a screen for at least 8 hours a day, more time than we spend on any other activity, including sleeping. As college students who are facing the reality of COVID-19, we spend so much time on screens. All our classes are now on screens, all our homework, papers, etc. And when we just want to take a break from it all, we watch videos and spend time on social media just to take a break. However, that time is still spent on screens. This graph here kind of explains that. So it talks about college students on a day-to-day basis from 2012 and 2013. At that point in time, they were spending about 5.5 hours on their computer, about 3.5 hours on their cell phone, and about 3 hours watching TV. This continues on talking about different video games and tablets that they also used. All this adds up to more than 12 hours a day, and we still use screens that much, if not more, today. Last semester, I had the opportunity to read a book by Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. In this book, he compares our society to that of Brave New World. He talks about how we live in a peekaboo world where now this event, now that, pops into view for a moment and then vanishes again. So essentially what he's talking about is the constant scrolling we do. When you're scrolling through social media or doing research, essentially when something doesn't grab our attention instantly, we move on to something new. The reason that this is because social media releases chemicals in our brain. So CBS reported on a study, and Anderson Cooper, who is a very trusted journalist, summarized it by saying, "Screen time stimulates the release of the brain chemical dopamine, which has a pivotal role in cravings and desire. This chemical is good. It's the same thing that comes from exercising or eating food. However, when it's in our brain in excess, this becomes a problem. It becomes an addiction." So this graph essentially explains how it works. We use social media. We make a post. We receive attention on that post, likes or comments. We get a dopamine hit from those comments, and then we want to use social media again. Now, this in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but when we get trapped in this cycle, it becomes an addiction, and then it's a problem. But screens are also altering our brain in other ways. As I mentioned earlier, it's changing our attention span. So Nicholas Carr, a professor who has devoted a lot of his research to studying this, states the more we use the web, the more we have to fight to stay focused on long pieces of writing. Essentially, we notice that things are harder. Sitting through an hour 15 lecture, reading a whole chapter from a physical textbook is so hard for us to sit down and just do because we are literally altering our brain. So these chemical changes are also altering our perception of the world. Jean Twenge talks about iGen. She has devoted her life to studying our generation, which she has nicknamed iGen because of the amount of time we spend on screens. She talks about how it's really good for us because we're more connected than any other generation in history. However, around the rise of social media, there became a surge in teen depression and suicide. I want to be very clear that this is not a direct causation, but there is an association between the two things. So this graph explains it. It might be kind of hard to see, but essentially this axis is the percent of high depressive symptoms in females and males, and the bottom is the year. So as you can see, right around 2014 or 2015, when social media became incredibly popular, there was a huge surge in females who had high depressive symptoms. And these females reached about 26% of females. Males also had a spike around this time, which is incredibly concerning. So, I would just like to conclude by wrapping up my main points. First, our lives revolve around screens. So much of our lives are based on screens, and there's really no way around that. Second, this is physically altering our brain, sometimes in good ways, but not always. And third, while social media is incredibly good and convenient, there are also some concerns about how it's impacting our lives. Social media and technology are so important and vital to our lives in so many ways, but they can also have negative effects. I would like you to take this information to with yourselves and do what you will with it. Thank you.